All right, everybody, it's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. You're not going to believe my guest today is the great Jim Lampley, Hall of Fame sportscaster with 50 years of on-site experience at numerous live sporting events that include college and NFL football, ABC's Wide World of Sports, inside NBA and MLB locker rooms, Wimbledon, Ryder Cup, PGA Golf, and 14 Olympics. For 30 years, he was the face and voice of HBO's World Championship Boxing, including anecdotes and interactions with the most famous fighters of his era, such as Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Sugar Ray Leonard, and George Foreman, who gave him the title of his memoir, which we'll get to in just a second, and the biggest lineup boxing matches of all time, including the billion-dollar bout between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, which was, I guess, probably still the largest gross income in the history of pay-per-view sports. Here is his memoir, It Happened. A uniquely lucky life in sports television. Jim, nice to see you. What is that ring? That looks like a Super Bowl ring.
So, probably
The
the
big
ring,
one.
the big one is the International Boxing Hall of Fame ring. In
Nice.
2015, I was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York.
Nice.
Sometimes people on the street or in the grocery store will mistake it for a Super Bowl ring because
Right.
it's big. No, it's not a Super Bowl ring, although I did host the Super Bowl telecast a few times. But at the end of the day, that's a boxing ring, and 90% of the people in the International Boxing Hall of Fame are fighters, but a few of us are broadcasters, and it's within my little enclosed world of boxing, it's quite an honor. So
It sure is. I assume Howard Cosell must be in there too.
I believe Howard is also in the Boxing Hall of Fame. I'm not sure if he ever made the trek to tiny Canastota, New York, and stayed in a fairly lurid casino in a little town near Canastota to go to the induction ceremony. But I've done that 3 or 4
Nice.
times, so
Nice.
I
Yeah.
I think I have more currency there now
Well,
than
I
Howard.
only have this little ring here. This is the Ram ring, Race Across
Oh,
America.
really? I didn't even know there was a Ram ring.
Yeah, there is. It's not particularly big and bold like that, but it's something I've had on my finger since 1984. I think we started giving them out. It was sort of patterned after the that long distance endurance running race in Colorado, where they have the Leadville 100, where they give a ring. That's where we got that
Oh,
idea.
I
So,
didn't know that they gave a ring at the Leadville 100. I also covered a 100-mile foot race, but it was
oh
not
boy,
the Leadville one. The Leadville one was regarded as very difficult because heat was
yeah,
a
yeah.
factor in Leadville.
Well, I read your whole book.
One I did
Listen.
was in Squaw Valley.
Oh,
Uh,
right, right.
and I remember people falling or slipping on the mountainsides in Squaw Valley and winding up with bloody shoes,
Right.
and completing the 100-mile foot race with bloody shoes. So
Yeah.
glad I was just a broadcaster.
Yeah. Well, I read your whole book. I listened to it on audio while I was out on a bike ride, several bike rides, and I was surprised to hear my name in there. So thanks for the shout out of your coverage of Ram, which we'll get to in a minute. But I also saw you on Rogan. That was super interesting. But before we get into all that, did you know Hulk Hogan since we just lost him?
I have never met Hulk Hogan.
Oh,
At least
okay.
I think I can't remember meeting Hulk Hogan. I might have at some point along the way, but no, I have no specific memory of him or having met him. Um, but of course, it's been a dying season, and
Yeah.
my giant loss was George Foreman.
Right.
The title of my book comes from my call of Foreman's climactic win over Michael Moorer to win the heavyweight championship at age 45. The prologue of the book is the 19-year-old me watching the 19-year-old Foreman win his Olympic gold medal in Mexico City. The title comes specifically from conversations I had with him before he defeated Moorer, because he was at that point our expert commentator on the HBO boxing telecast. He grew to become a really close friend of mine and a very valued spiritual advisor. He died suddenly without warning 14 days before the publication of my book.
Mm.
So it's eerie,
Mm-hmm.
all the ways in which George is connected to this book enterprise, and I miss him. And probably somewhere out there, there are a lot of people who have similar stories relative to Hulk Hogan, but no, I never met him.
Yeah. Well, I find myself reading obits like that more and more at my age of 70, and you're 76. So,
Too
it's
many.
like, I know. Just, who else? Tom Lehrer just died yesterday.
Yeah, and
And
I was a Tom Lehrer fan. I
yeah,
always will remember, was a year ago November, I went out to hunt some deer on a morning bright and clear. I went and shot the maximum my little game laws would allow, 2 game wardens, 7 hunters, and a cow. I can still remember Tom Lehrer lyrics.
amazing. Yeah, I love the one
That's bizarre.
about Werner von Braun. I where the rockets land is not in my department. And the Nazi schmazzies. That's really funny. So, when you sit down to write a memoir autobiography, I always joke I'm going to write the first unauthorized autobiography. How do you decide what to include, what not to include, what's important? I mean, it's your story, but you want to give readers the sense like, well, I'm really getting some honesty here.
I wanted to be as naturalistic as I could be in writing an autobiography. Um, I wanted to avoid writing notes and outlines and all sorts of things that would restrict emotion. And I wanted the autobiography to be as personal and internal a statement as it could be. So the method that I achieved for that, and I knew that I was being inspired basically to write a book by my storytelling background, and my storytelling background was given to me by my double widow mother and my paternal grandmother. And the two of them, my wife always says that most of my stories begin with the same words, and the words are, my father died when I was 5 years old. After my father died when I was 5 years old, my paternal grandmother, his mother, and my mother, his widow, spent 30 years competing for my attention by telling me stories. They were inveterate, nonstop storytellers. I would spend all summer in my grandmother's kitchen in Hendersonville, North Carolina, listening to her tell stories while she stood in the kitchen and made pound cakes. And then I would go home to Florida, where I lived with my mother, and wait for her to come home from selling life insurance, and she would stand in the kitchen and tell me her stories. And they were both great at it. And they both influenced my ability to understand narratives and what makes something interesting and how do you say it. And all of that fell into my gestalt, so to speak. You know, you're a psychologist. And so when I decided I was going to write a book, and I thought to myself, okay, how do I make it naturalistic? How do I bring in all the emotion and leave out, some kind of self-directed preciousness in doing this? And the method I chose was I will let my mother and my grandmother, both of them gone a long time, I'll let them tell me the story. So I achieved a method where every day I would write for as long as I felt like writing and tell the stories that were in my mind on that particular day. Then I would go to bed that night and let my mother and my grandmother speak to me
Hmm.
and tell me what was going to come next. No written notes, nothing in the way of a prescribed structure, just me doing my best to hear my life story the way my mother and my grandmother would have told it, and then putting that down on paper. And this went on for 3 or 4 months.
Hmm.
And I kept feeding the material to my as told to author, Art Chansky. I didn't know whether he was editing or not. As it turned out, he wasn't. And eventually I called him and I said, how close are we to having a book? And he said, how close do you want to be to having a book? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, you have a book right now. I could send this to the publisher as it is. My suggestion would be look at it, put the finishing touches on it, and then let's send it to the publisher. I said, is it a good book? He said, no, it's a great book. So on that basis, we did it. And I don't know if anybody else has ever used exactly that method, but that's what worked for me. My mother and my grandmother speaking to
Nice.
me while my head was on the pillow at night.
Nice. Channeling. Well, one of the things I like reading autobiographies and memoirs of people that have lived a long life is they can look back and consider the context of small contingent events that happen early that may not be apparent what their meaning is until decades later. So when I read when I see some celebrity has an autobiography they wrote at age 30, it's like, oh, come on. How do you know something that happened to you when you were
How do you
25, what
know
that actually
what
means?
matters? Yeah, you're going to write another one later on. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, the small contingent events, like had your mother's husbands not died, one or the other one, and you had a father, how would that have changed things? That's
If
what,
my
like,
mother's first husband doesn't die in a plane crash coming back from Saipan at the end of World War II, I don't exist. Okay?
right, right.
So I am the product of a tragedy and a poignant movie-like story wherein my father, his wingmate and good buddy in the bomber squadron in which they both participated through all of World War II, is 18 miles away from the plane crash where my brother's father is killed and winds up taking a uniform and some medals to Tampa for my mother to bury. And they began seeing each other and saw each other over the next 3 years. And I was born eventually in 1949. Without that poignant story in and of itself, I don't exist. So I'm the product of a movie story to begin with. And then you add in all the unexpected and cosmically spontaneous things that happened in my life, like winning a television talent hunt that I wasn't supposed to win, like, winding up going to more Olympics as a broadcaster than anybody else. All these things are off the board unpredictable. So I knew that my story, if people believed it, would be interesting. And I hope people do believe it because it is the truth.
Well, as in the title, It Happened. But the subtitle, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. But, luck, I think, plays a much larger role than most people think. I'll just tee this up for you in cognitive psychology studies, behavior genetics, and so forth. There's an unexplained phenomenon of that's unaccountable by genes and environment. So you have identical twins raised in the same home, identical twins raised in separate homes, and so on and so forth. You have all these variations, and it counts for a lot. So identical twins have, really peculiar little habits, even those separated from birth. Like one of them, the most famous ones, Jack and I forget his brother's name. One was raised as a Jew, one was raised in a Nazi home. And so they couldn't be more different in their environment, but they both married women that had like the same names, that looked the same. They both had rubber bands that they liked to snap on their wrist.
And the one who was raised as a Nazi was brought to San Diego well into his middle years to meet the one who had been
Right.
raised as a Jew.
Right.
And when he got off the plane at the San Diego airport, they were wearing the same shirt. They were
Right.
wearing the same slacks. They had the same haircut. They had been separated for more than 40 years. It was in one of those documentaries I saw on Discovery Channel or something like that. And yes, twinship is an astonishing phenomenon that replicates those kinds of things over and over and over, showing us that yes, there's something in our DNA, and there may even be something in our DNA that attracts luck. If there is, I had it.
Yes. Here's Nancy the person you're referring to is Nancy Siegel, who did the study on them and brought them together, Jack and Oscar. But she records them saying, as Oscar said to Jack during one of their reunions, if we had been switched, I would have been the Jew and you would have been the Nazi. So there's also an element of randomness to it, where you just happen to have been born and which path you took. So I like to use the metaphor Jorge Borges' Garden of Forking Paths, where you zigged instead of zagged and you took that step instead of this step. And I think much of life is like that. Heraclitus's principle, no man ever steps in the same river twice. Ford is not the same river and he's not the same man. So, in a replay of your life, had you gone left instead of right, things could have been different. And
Well,
so
of course, you know the random circumstance that I explain in the book that matches with everything you're talking about, which is that when I won the college football talent hunt in 1974, that was in the ABC Sports division run by legendary chief executive Roone Arledge, and nobody other than I knew that I had grown up around the corner from Arledge's parents. I had caddied for both of his parents at the Hendersonville Golf and Country Club. My mother was in the same bridge club with his mother in Hendersonville to that day. And ultimately, I wound up being admonished by him in a restroom at the ABC building in New York saying, never, ever are you going to reveal any of that. Now it can be revealed. But yes, out of a 432 candidate talent hunt, they chose the guy who had grown up around the corner from Arledge's parents. And months went by before I revealed that. And when I revealed it, I revealed it directly to him. And the famous red face turned white. And he said, you're never going to tell that to anybody as long as you live. And I said, well, all right, I get it.
Well, everybody's still alive. Yeah, because
But
it would
yes,
look like.
the suggestion that some people's DNA somehow attracts luck, I believe it. I
Yeah.
don't have any other choice than to believe it.
Here's the research on this. Richard Wiseman, the psychologist, wrote a book on luck. And so there's no actually cosmic luck where there's some force directing things to happen. But people who self-report as being lucky also score higher in openness to experience, in extroversion. They're more likely to travel. They're more likely to go to parties. And when they go to parties, they're more likely to engage with people. And then that gets them some connection to a job or a spouse or whatever. And then in hindsight, they look back and go, wow, I was so lucky. I'm a lucky person. But Wiseman's point is like, well, you sort of make your own luck by your temperament, your personality, the way you engage with the world.
Well, the beginning defining characteristic of my life is unlucky. My father died when I was 5 years old.
Right.
Everything starts with that. So it's natural in my situation to wonder, all right, was all of the good luck that ultimately followed all that the universe paying me back for the bad luck of my father dying when I was 5 years old? And, you could spend 1,000 years trying to answer that question and you wouldn't be able to do it. But at the end of the day, my whole existence logically prompts questions like that.
Yeah. Well, so had you not won that contest, what would Jim Lampley have been doing at the next year after that, let's say? In other words, maybe you would have had some other job because you're good at this.
I would have actually been writing the master's thesis and finishing the program that I was in when I was plucked out of that program to go to work at ABC Sports. I would have actually gotten the master's degree, which I never did. I never even presented a master's thesis topic. Once I was chosen out of the talent hunt and was on national telecasts of college football games, and then pretty shortly after that, doing Wide World of Sports segments and learning how to do all of the wacky, crazy events in the Wide World of Sports, et cetera. Once I was doing all that, what was the point of going through all the research necessary to write a thesis and get a master's degree, which wasn't going to advance my cause in any way, shape, or form? If somebody's an executive in a network, it might matter whether you have a master's degree in radio, television, and motion pictures. But for a person who was on the air, it didn't matter. So, from that point forward, from the moment I was luckily chosen out of the talent hunt, then now the goal was, okay, make this work, capitalize on this. And I have been accused in the past by some people of lying about having a master's degree. I never told anybody I had a master's degree. I told people I went to a master's degree program at the University of North Carolina. I completed all of the coursework, but then the rest of it is I didn't write the thesis because I was staying at the Holiday Inn for the Arkansas versus Texas football game in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I didn't have time to write any master's degree thesis.
You might have ended up being a college professor, and then you would have missed all the other opportunities.
I would very much have loved to have been a college professor.
Yeah.
At my alma mater, the University of North Carolina. It took a long time to evolve back to Chapel Hill, but here I am.
That's right. So you are still kind of fulfilling that earlier pathway.
I never
So
got the Chapel Hill out of my system, and that's true of a lot of people.
So then there's the luck of when you happen to be born. The most famous example of this is, had Bill Gates been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, he would not be the richest man in the world because he was there at the right moment at the right time. Or the Google guys, they are at Stanford University, graduate students, at the very moment when we needed a search engine that really worked, and they are the ones that came up with it. Had they been born 10 years earlier, 10 years later, and so on. Had you been born now, or not right now, but let's say you were coming of age now, you'd have a completely different career. But on the other hand, you're good at what you do, and you would have maybe have a Substack column and a podcast and I don't know what that is in sports media these days that would be successful. How do you think about that?
If I had been born now, would I have paid devoted attention to boxing, which is now something of a fringe attraction, not
Mm.
necessarily seen as mainstream, as opposed to my childhood from the moment that my mother sat me down in 1955 at age 6 and said, watch this television. You're going to see Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world, because if your father were alive, this is what he'd be doing, and you'd be doing it with him, which kicked off me watching Friday night fights from Gillette on network television every Friday night for the next 6 years or so, and seeing probably hundreds of prize fights that I never otherwise would have seen. And, therefore, when somebody in 1987, years later, a network television executive who wants to get rid of me assigns me to boxing for that purpose, thinking this spit and polished preppy college kid from Chapel Hill is not possibly going to know anything about boxing. He didn't realize that I had what amounted to a graduate education in boxing, and he was assigning me to the one sport that might be friendliest to my ongoing ambitions as a network television sportscaster. So there are lots of things like that, counterintuitive, unpredictable. From the standpoint of your life as a psychologist, my life is a bizarre and productive study,
Yes,
and
indeed.
I knew that. I knew that before I sat down to write the book. I totally understood that when I wrote the book, there would be quite a number of instances during the book when any thoughtful reader was going to say, "Is this really true? Is he making this up, or did this really happen?" And of course, the title comes from my call of Foreman's win over Michael Moore, but it was the right title because of exactly that factor. I wanted to inculcate into the reader an underlying understanding that, yeah, it really did take place. I'm not making it up.
Yeah. Well, so being, raised by a single mom without a father in the home, social psychologists talk about this as a factor amongst many of, let's say, the Black community versus the other communities that, causes them to struggle a little bit more, on top of which, crappier schools or poor neighborhoods and so on and so forth. Anyway, so all these are like variables that go into determining or influencing how a life turns out. Okay. So, like, one of the most famous examples of this in one of my podcast guest books was, the entire first chapter is about this poor black kid who had like the worst background you could possibly imagine. Turns out at the end of the chapter, it's LeBron James. Okay. So why is it LeBron James or George Foreman or any of these boxers that you really knew who had these terrible backgrounds somehow used what would otherwise hold somebody back to inspire them or motivate them or to become, the greatest of all time?
An innate level of intelligence and kinetic ability to adjust to forces around them that most people would underestimate or overlook because of the circumstances of their background.
Hmm.
The best story of all about Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali, of course, the very best story of all about Cassius Clay's background is that when he was in his senior year in high school in Louisville, Kentucky, the math teacher at the high school went to the principal of the high school and said, Cassius does not have the grade levels and the test performances in my course necessary to pass the course. And if I give him an F in the course, then he will not graduate. And the principal said, well, if those are his grades, That's what has to happen. And the math teacher said, no, that can't happen. We cannot be the high school that does not choose to give a graduation diploma to a boy who is going to become the most famous man in the world. And I promise you, he's going to be the most famous man in the world. We've got to give him a diploma. That's how Cassius Clay graduated from high school, because a brilliant math teacher recognized what was in front of him.
It's amazing they
And
can see that.
that's Cassius Clay. That's LeBron James. That's any number of other people from similar backgrounds whom we could name. They're never, as children, in circumstances where you're going to see the genius. They have to somehow find a path that leads them forward. With LeBron, it was basketball. With Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, it was boxing. With a lot of people from those backgrounds, it's music or some other part of the arts. I've known many, many, many of them. And you know them when you see them. You meet these people, you get to know them, as I did with Cassius Clay. I don't know LeBron, but I did meet him and I interviewed him, but I don't really know him. But if you meet them and spend time with them, as I did with Muhammad Ali, after a while you realize, genius, nobody else like him. And so that's what I would attribute that to.
Yeah.
But you're the psychologist.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. In the case of George Foreman, since you did know him, there's another interesting effect here in which personality characteristics are thought to be fairly stable throughout the lifetime. People rarely make dramatic changes in their temperament and personality. But George Foreman, it seems like he did. You know, he was kind of a badass motherfucker, mean guy, and then after the loss to Ali, and he comes back and reinvents himself. It's astonishing.
He had done it first way earlier than that. And yes, he was a skillful reinventor, and he was an extremely thoughtful man, okay? He was always trying to put things in perspective. Now, this after a childhood in the Fifth Ward of Houston, which was brutal. And the Fifth Ward of Houston at that moment was one of the worst neighborhoods in the United States. It was like Brownsville and Brooklyn. It was, like Watts Ghetto in Los Angeles. It was bad. And Foreman decided at age 17, 18 that he didn't want to be stuck in the Fifth Ward of Houston. He wanted to get out somehow. So he signed up for the Job Corps, and he wound up in the Job Corps in Pleasanton, California, upstate in California. And that's where he was taught to box. Somebody, pulled him out of a lineup or something like that and said, you look like you could be a boxer. And he was taught to box. He learned to box at the Job Corps. But later he told me, and I learned to believe everything George told me, regardless of how bizarre it sounded. Later he told me that one of his first roommates and friends at the Job Corps was a white guy who was an extreme Bob Dylan addict. Loved and worshipped and adored Bob Dylan. And of course, we're in the early stages of Dylan's emergence as a folk singing icon. And one day, Foreman said to this guy, this friend of his said, could I learn those lyrics? Could you teach me those lyrics and how to understand them? And the guy said, well, sure. All you have to do is listen to the songs. That wasn't good enough for George. He went out and bought sheet music. And he swore to me that he knew the lyrics of early Dylan, like, It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, or the other great songs from that era. And, even Like a Rolling Stone. And I said, George, you know those lyrics? And he began reciting them to me. Okay. Decades later, George was reciting to me Bob Dylan lyrics that he had memorized as a teenager. Again, innate genius. I'm not sure that Muhammad, when he was first getting ready to fight George, recognized that George was like him in that sense. I'm not sure how many people really understood George's enormous kinetic intelligence. I got it because I worked next to him. I got it because he told me several times before the Moore fight, in which he was like an 8-1 or 9-1 underdog. You watch. he will come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. And you watch the 10th round of that fight. Tell me there's any better verbal description of what happens.
I
And
rewatched
that's
that after I read that in your book, and sure enough, it was astonishing.
came and stood in front of him and let them knock him out. How
Yeah.
did George know that was going to happen? Did he somehow construct that? Did he gull Moore into it, or was it just a vision? Who knows? But the bottom line is it happened. And I was sitting there as referee Joe Cortez was counting and got to 6, 7. It's abundantly clear Moore is not going to get up. And I'd faced this situation once before when Tyson was knocked out by Buster Douglas in Tokyo. Okay, the count is going to complete. This guy's going to be knocked out. What in the world am I going to say about it? This is one of the most counterintuitive and unexpected things that could ever happen in boxing. In Tokyo, for a particular reason, that became Mike Tyson has been knocked out, in just about that tone of voice, as matter of fact as I could make it. In Las Vegas on November 5, 1994, that became it happened. It happened. And I was really talking to George because he had said to me several times exactly what happened in the fight.
But after his loss to Ali, he kind of dropped out of boxing for a while, was a preacher, and then started his comeback. And I remember seeing him on talk shows. He was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he was just before a fight with some guy named Tex. You'll know who this is. And Johnny says, "Well, is he any good?" And George says, "I hope not." I mean, it was funny. It was really funny. It's like, this is
the innate intelligence I'm talking about. Okay. That's the kind of kinetic, spontaneous, immediate intelligence that geniuses have. Muhammad Ali was a genius. George Foreman was also a genius. How else could he have become the single most successful electronic media pitchman in American
the
society
barbecues.
history? Yeah. And by the way, he didn't have some agent or manager choosing those products.
Oh,
George chose the products. He chose those things that he thought he, within his persona, could sell. And he did a brilliant job of it. Big Man's Clothing, Meineke mufflers, the grill. He realized that the grill was good, that it did what it said it would do, that it was, in effect, a champion, and made millions and millions and millions of dollars off that.
amazing. Would you put Mike Tyson in that same category?
Mike is, did you see the one-man show?
I did, yes, but not live in
Okay.
person.
If you
Wherever it
saw the
was.
one-man show,
Yeah,
you saw the element of genius in Mike's character.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Mike had a horrible, difficult, very, very bad background, worse than either
yeah.
George or Muhammad. Okay. Much, much more deprived, much, much more painful. He had to emerge literally from the shadows, and with Customato's help, he did. And I think that what I observed during his career was that when the myth got blown up and people thought Mike was something other than what he was, when they thought he was unbeatable, that he would destroy every opponent, that nobody could last more than a couple of rounds, in a relatively short period of time, it became clear that that wasn't true, and that a lot of people were willfully overlooking the reality of his career. Mike wasn't. He
Hmm.
knew. He always knew very clearly who he was. And he knew better than anybody else that Buster Douglas, 42-1 underdog, was a threat to him
Mm,
and could beat him if he did not have a great day, and he didn't.
mm.
Mike, yes, I think I would say the same thing about Mike. The element of genius, and genius in some way encouraged, fashioned, and polished by extreme deprivation.
Right. So there, maybe the role of a mentor is important in these lives.
Oh, I think mentors are important to everybody.
Yeah,
And, I had a mentor at ABC Sports, a guy named Chuck Howard, who was ultimately fired by the same guy who wanted to get rid of me by signing me to boxing. But yes, mentors give you confidence. Mentors give you self-belief. Mentors help to show you the path, and I think they are tremendously important to the evolution of anyone who has achieved unexpected success.
yeah. Let's talk about excellence in sports and life in general, other professions. Let me tee this up for you because you mentioned these individuals who are geniuses. This is true in all fields. So one thing is a Pareto distribution or a power law distribution, sometimes called an 80-20 rule, where like 20% of musicians make 80% of the money or sell 80% of the records, or 20% of authors sell 80% of books, and so on. And this seems to be the case in most sports. Like, I've taken up tennis in addition to cycling. So I watch all the Grand Slams. And by the time you get to the quarterfinal, the final 16 or the final 8, it's always the same people.
You're seeing the people that you expect to see. Yes.
Yeah. So out of 1,000 fantastic.
Tennis is the perfect example, because you're talking about almost incredibly, I try to stay away from the overused word incredible, but almost incredibly fine margins of competition. They play 5 sets. It takes 3.5 hours. It comes down to 1 point, 1 shot, here or there. Do you reach that ball that's 1.5 feet outside the sideline, or do you not reach it? That becomes the deciding fulcrum in the match. And on that basis, we say, oh, Alcazar is better than the guy that he's playing. It's insane in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. And tennis players understand and recognize that real greatness is what you can do in that moment when it most matters, when you are dead tired, when you're 3.5 hours into the match, when you're playing somebody who you know is just as good as you, and you're looking for the one tiny moment that can give you the fulcrum on which you're going to win. Can you find that moment, and can you capitalize on it?
Yeah.
And the great players are the ones who can do that over and over and over. Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert wind up becoming best friends.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Why do they wind up becoming best friends? Because they know they have an experience only they share. George Foreman wound up, despite all of his anger and disillusionment about how the world treated what happened in Zaire. Oh, you got snookered. You were gulled into sleep by what Muhammad did. George never believed that. He believed that Muhammad got lucky. But then ultimately, he grew to understand and respect who Muhammad was in terms of him. And also that without Muhammad, he wouldn't have been as big. He wouldn't have had as meaningful a reputation, et cetera, et cetera. And he wound up in circumstances where he would worry about Muhammad because of his Parkinson's disease at some public event, and he would be the protector. He would take care of Muhammad. He would support him and be sure that Muhammad made it through the day in these events and stuff like that. So there's, in addition to all of the other inexplicable psychological factors we're discussing, there's a kinetic understanding that emerges between geniuses over periods of time when they face these moments against each other across the net, over and over and over. Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi. Who do you think they think of last every night when they go to bed before they go to sleep? They think of each other, of course, because they are defined by each other.
Did
Martina
you read,
and Chrissy,
Did you read Agassi's autobiography? I mean,
I heard it was a great book.
Yeah, it was a great book. But boy,
I think I skimmed it in a bookstore. I heard it was a really great book.
Yeah, no, but it's brutal because it was his father that really pushed him into tennis, way beyond what he really wanted to go. By the time
how many athletes have brutal relationships with their fathers?
Yeah,
many, many, many.
Yeah, So not having a father is one thing. Having an overbearing father, I mean, he says he just hated the game.
It's so funny that you say that. My father died when I was 5 years old. And many people treat that as a logically tragic event in my life. And I can't count the times that I have said to somebody, think about it. I never had a fight with him. I never had an argument with him. I can only remember being punished by him one time. Most of the time during my upbringing, he was the picture on the wall in that Air Force uniform as a World War II hero. He was unimpeachable. He was beyond criticism. I never had a negative thought or moment about him. What a gift that is to a son who wants to treasure his father. How ironic is that? My father died when I was 5 years old, and as the result, we have a great relationship.
That's really a great way to put it. Yeah. Well, in other words, with hindsight, whatever you chose to do ended up being the way it seemed like it should have been, or it worked out this way. So you go to one
It was the
college instead of
guiding hand in the universe. Yes.
yes,
Who was the guiding hand in the universe? Was it my father? Was it my mother?
yes.
Who was the guiding hand in the universe?
I think it's
Was it
chance.
just luck? What
Yeah,
is luck?
yeah.
And if luck is just completely random and spontaneous, why do some people, like Jim Lampley, have so much of it while other people don't seem to have any? I don't get it.
Well, the people that self-report having bad luck, they definitely feel the universe has stepped up against them. But parenthetically, I just want to ask you about the Foreman fight, the Foreman Ali fight, and the Buster Douglas Mike Tyson fight. Wasn't there something about the 10 count that was slightly off, or it was close, or they could have gotten up but they didn't because they looked the wrong way, or I forget.
Are you talking about Foreman Ali and Zaire?
Yeah,
Don't remember any real controversy about the 10 count, but arguing about a 10 count is not really uncommon in boxing.
I
Forgive
see.
me if there was a controversy about the 10 count in Zaire. I don't remember it, and I don't remember that being a part of George's rant. George's rant was he got all this credit for gulling me into the wrong fight, et cetera, and wearing me out with that rope-a-dope tactic and making me miss. He got all that credit for that, when reality is he just got lucky.
Hmm,
Okay, he got lucky and landed a big shot. That was
I see.
George's take.
I see. Yeah, at one of his interviews later, he said Ali kept whispering to him in his ear, "Is that all you got, George?" And George said, "I remember thinking, yeah, that's all I got." It's really fun.
George, in addition to many of his qualities, George was a great storyteller.
Yeah,
And do I think that George might have occasionally embellished a story to make it better? Maybe,
yeah,
possibly.
yeah.
But I do think that he knew what he was doing against Michael Moore,
Right.
and it
Uh,
was a version of what Ali had done to him in Zaire.
in this
And
sketch.
remember, he wore the same trunks
Oh,
against
right.
Moore that night that he
That's
had
right.
worn in Zaire 20 years before. And
That's
he
right.
came to the ring. A lot of people don't know this. He came to the ring reciting the words from The Impossible Dream to
Mm,
himself. So he walks to the ring in the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, of all places, saying, to dream the impossible dream, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to et cetera, all that stuff. That was George. There was a poet in him, just as there was in Ali.
nice. Okay, in this category of excellence, one of my favorite essays by Stephen Jay Gould, was the Harvard paleontologist and statistician, was "Why No One Hits 400 in Baseball Anymore." Are you familiar with this, or have you read this?
Haven't read Stephen Jay Gould's essay on it. I think that one reason nobody hits 400 in baseball anymore is the development of pitches like the slider. And, the 400 hitters, they didn't have to face the slider. They faced a fastball, a curveball, and a changeup. Every pitcher I ever spoke to, every pitching coach I ever spoke to, they all told me that the slider changed baseball.
Wow.
Because before that pitch, there wasn't anything else that was as deceptive
Mm,
and as hard to react to as
mm,
the slider. It had a sharper, later break. And because of the development of that pitch, it got harder to hit.
interesting.
Suddenly, after so many pitchers were throwing a slider, you could win the batting championship with a 328 average. There was a moment when 328 wouldn't have been in the top 10 in the
Right.
American League or the National League.
Here's Gould's explanation. He conducted an extensive analysis of why no one hits 400 in baseball anymore, in which he collected data from baseball archives, computed standard deviations between the worst hitters and the average, and the best hitters and the average for over 100 years of the game's history, and discovered a statistical trend of improvement in the average play over time, such that the best players today, which are absolutely as good, if not better, than players from earlier in the century, but they're relatively worse compared to today's higher average level of play. So, for example, Gould points out that the difference between Ted Williams, last person to hit 400 in 1941, and Tony Gwynn in 1994, he hit 394. That's just 6 hits difference. Or George Brett in 1980 hit 390. That's just 5 hits in an entire season. So Gould's point is the average outfielder or infielder is so much taller, better, bigger gloves, faster, that they can snag those 4, 5, or 6. What would have been hits in the 1950s, they're getting them in the 1980s.
Well, I think that's a logical and useful explanation, but there's no way for us to know whether that is the absolute hard and fast concrete answer. For further interpretation on this, you need to turn to another University of North Carolina graduate whose name is Peter Gammons, who was the longtime, very revered baseball writer for the Boston Globe. I probably knew some of the same people that Stephen Jay Gould knew, but
Nice.
at any rate, Gammons would have a better answer than I do as to the whole notion of why people don't hit 400 anymore. But your point about 5 hits making such a huge difference in what the average would be, most people don't even begin to realize that.
Yeah.
But players do.
Yeah.
I remember first time I ever met Pete Rose in a locker room in Philadelphia when he was with the Phillies. And he pulled me aside and recited to me the current, at that moment, lifetime averages of the top 6 or 7 hitters in the National League, to make the point that his was the highest, of course. But it didn't even occur to me at that moment, all right, how many hits difference is there between this other guy's average and Pete's? And it was probably, as you point out, a relatively minuscule number. People don't realize that about baseball statistics. There are so many numbers that are up in the hundreds or even the thousands that you don't think that it could be that fine a line, but it is.
Do you think Pete should be inducted into the Hall of Fame?
I don't know whether Pete is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I was never a baseball writer. I'm not a part of the baseball writing culture. I did call baseball on ABC Sports for a couple of years, regional telecasts, not the main game. That was not a sport where I succeeded as a sports announcer, so I don't have any real authority on the subject. I used to say, no, Pete would never be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Now standards seem to be relaxing in the podcast and social media era. If this was still only professional media talking about it, you wouldn't have nearly as many people pushing the idea that Pete should be in the Hall of Fame. But social media have changed the standards of our society.
Yeah. Well, the curious thing about that particular story, because I remember that Sports Illustrated cover story about Pete's gambling, where the Major League Baseball heads, kind of took him into a room and said, "Pete, we know you bet on baseball. We have your signature on the betting sheets. We talked to the bookies and so on. We know you did it. We don't want to destroy your. We need you. Baseball loves you. Just fess up. You'll serve some time, and then boom, you're back in." And he said, "Nope, that's not my signature." Why is it people, once they've gone down a path, I guess, of lying, just cannot say, you know what, I lied and I'm going to now confess? Maybe some do.
Because they've been spoiled by their success. Pete, for a long time, was sacrosanct and never had to worry about whether all of this was going to be exposed and was going to hurt him. So it's only logical, it's only natural that if you spend a lot of period of time being so lucky that nobody knows that you bet on baseball, you expect that luck is going to extend. You begin to think it's your birthright. When I got fired from jobs as a network television sportscaster, oh yeah, part of me would think, oh, this is over. This ride on the merry-go-round has ended. But there was another part of me, and of course, agents who would tell me, this isn't over. They took your job, they didn't take your talent. That's one of the most important lines
That's a great line.
in the book. Okay,
Yeah.
they can do a variety of things to take stuff away from Pete Rose, but they can't take away that which is written in the record book. That many hits, that batting average, etc., that's locked in. So Pete gets to believe until his dying day that he is who he is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that day has come and gone. Yeah, I guess it's one of those questionable moral issues like doping in cycling, where in Lance's era anyway, I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but in Lance's era, they were all doing it. So what brought Lance down was not the doping, really. It was, the other things, the lawsuits and all that stuff, and that people got
Well,
pissed off.
he was the most successful, so
Yeah,
he became the target, right?
that's right. Right.
Yeah, and probably he became the target because of a lot of underground word of mouth, where, yes, quite conceivably, people who were doing the same thing were trying to make sure that he got cut down for it. I don't know. I didn't know any of those other bicycle racers. I just know that once performance-enhancing drugs began to show up in the bloodstream of sports, you weren't going to get them out.
Yeah.
There was no process, testing, penalties, etc., by which you were going to thoroughly remove performance-enhancing drugs, because the scientists are always one step ahead of the jailers.
Yes.
Always.
Right. Well, in that case, there was an Operation Puerto, a Spanish investigation of the Spanish cyclists, and they actually broke into the lab of the drug guy, the blood guy, doping doctor, and it wasn't just cyclists; it was like soccer players, swimmers, track and field, and so on. It's like, oh my God, this is pervasive. Yes, and so it's a game theory problem. The moment one person's doing it, or you think others are doing it, and then you have to do it to stay up, and then everybody thinks, well, I have to do it. I don't want to do it, but I have to do it because everybody else is doing it. Then you get a cascading effect. Would that also explain the Barry Bonds effect? I think he said he watched Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa, riding the wave that year, and thought, I know what these guys are doing. I'm going to do it.
Logical. Makes
Yeah.
sense. I have a talking relationship now with the most famous performance-enhancing drug purveyor ever in our society, Victor Conti.
Oh, yes. Oh, you do. You know him. Oh, wow. Okay.
And I learn a lot of things from Victor Conti. We've talked about Bonds and Sosa and Marion Jones and McGuire and all of those people. Victor now has completely changed his uniform, his outfit, and tries to be a force for clean sport, particularly in boxing, because as he said to me, performance enhancing drugs in bicycle racing, exactly who gets hurt. Okay.
Right.
Other competitors get hurt, but um, it isn't as if somebody's life is at stake. Boxing,
Right.
you're hitting people on the head. You're
Oh,
not hitting
right.
baseballs. You're hitting people on the head in boxing, and you are delivering meaningful thudding blows to the cranium
Mm, mm,
that ultimately, over a long period of time, are going to affect health. So in that instance, we have to protect people in every way that we can.
mm.
So Victor has an organization called SNAC, where he trains boxers with clean methods. There had never been a positive test coming out of his workout facility in Northern California. And, he shows them which supplements, until they outlaw nutritional supplements, Victor will be fine,
Mm.
because he's a genius at figuring out which nutritional supplements will do what. When
Right.
you watch Terrence Crawford against Canelo Alvarez in September,
Mm.
in arguably the fight of the century, not century, the fight of the last 10 years for sure. If you see Terrence Crawford against Canelo Alvarez, you're looking at a natural 147-pound fighter, Crawford, who's going to be fighting a natural 168-pound fighter, Canelo, who has achieved some things at 175. How can Crawford have any chance against Canelo? He has Victor Conti. He
Mm.
has Conti's substances, and all natural, all legal, et cetera, et cetera. He'll go into the ring at about 162 or 163 pounds. Canelo will be about 174. It's still an advantage for Canelo,
Mm.
but it's not as big an advantage as it would be if Crawford did not have a genius physical conditioner showing him how to put on a meaningful 15 or 16 pounds.
Without steroids. Yeah.
Without steroids,
Right.
correct. Without any substance that takes you to an illegal test. Victor has helped the governing organizations that test to understand and figure out which things ought to be illegal and which things don't need to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
illegal.
Well, you see this with athletes like Tom Brady and Novak Djokovic, playing all the way up until their early 40s.
100.
Imagine since you wrote about Mickey Mantle, imagine if Mickey Mantle took care of himself and had the trainers and the nutrition and the diet and all that stuff.
100%. Imagine if Mantle wasn't in the bar drinking scotch every night.
Right. Yeah. He had Victor Conte giving him supplements and healthy
100
nutrition.
would have been an
Yeah.
entirely different situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's truly amazing. All right. Athletes and politics. Everybody lost their mind over Colin Kaepernick taking a knee at the football game. But how is that different, really, from you wrote about Tommy Smith and John Carlos posing on the podium there with their fists up, and Muhammad Ali famously making political statements about the Vietnam War. Have athletes always done this, and what's the moral issues there?
I don't think athletes have always done this. I
No.
don't know of a history of baseball players or football players or Jack Dempsey making political
Mm,
statements in the 20s and 30s. If it happened, I'm not aware of it. I think that you just nailed it right
yeah,
there.
that was
It
there. Yeah.
emerged in the 60s. It
Yeah.
emerged in the particular media vortex, the arrival of electronic media, the development of electronic media, the expansion of television, the relatively sudden arrival of a television set in virtually every home in the United States, a different kind of news media sharing, the spontaneous impact of doing something on camera or, on a microphone that's different from people reading about it in a newspaper. I think all those things filter into the arrival of politics in sports. And
Yeah.
then, you know, it always takes a genius. It takes one transformative figure. I believe in that. And the transformative figure was Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
He changed everything. Before Smith and Carlos in 1968, Ali won the heavyweight championship in 1964, and 2 days later stood on a street corner in Miami and said, "Now I'm a follower of the Nation of Islam, and my name is Muhammad Ali." That was overwhelmingly jarring to a teenage kid who had grown up loving him as Cassius Clay. I had
Mm,
to change all of my perspectives. I did, with my mother's help, ultimately agree with him about the Vietnam War, but it was really difficult to change my perspective and understand um, who he now was and why he wanted me to call him Muhammad Ali. But it was in the 60s. It was in the incubator decade
mm.
for all of those kinds of changes. And I think it happened then.
Yeah. No, that's probably right. There's that famous story of Pee Wee Reese going over to Jackie Robinson and putting his arm around him when all the fans in the other stadium were booing and hurling racial epithets against
Pee Wee
Jackie.
Reese was from
Apparently,
Louisville,
but
Kentucky.
apparently this
Louisville
never
was
happened.
regarded as a southern town
Yeah.
at that time. I'm sorry, I spoke over you. What were you saying?
Oh, I was saying apparently this never happened.
Oh,
Yeah.
uh, I I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Now, and I could be wrong. I could be talking myself into this, but I believe I've seen a photo of Reese with his arm around Robinson's shoulders. So,
Okay. All right.
yeah,
Well,
I
let's
believe
check
I've
that
seen
out.
that.
Yeah.
I can't, at this moment, I'm not able to pull it out of a stack, but I believe I've seen a photo of Reese with his arm around Jackie Robinson's shoulders.
Okay. Other famous athletes that I wanted to ask you about: OJ Simpson. So you wrote a chapter about that, how shocking it was. You had to face the reality of what he was or what he did in any case. Just tell us, before all that happened, the murder and all that, what kind of person was he, and why were you so shocked?
Well, a part of the context of the whole O.J. Simpson thing is that he was the product of a particular, protected, unique background. You would have to live in Los Angeles, and you particularly would have had to live in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s to understand the level of preeminence that a USC tailback has in that community, and
Mm,
particularly a USC tailback who wins the Heisman Trophy. One thing I always say to people about Los Angeles is UCLA is the larger, more high prestige, more globally important university. LA is run by SC grads, okay? It is an enclosed cubicle, the politics of Los Angeles. OJ was the darling of the enclosed cubicle. He was, because he was USC, because he had done what he'd done. And then you figure in, again, genius, personality. OJ was spectacularly charismatic, spectacularly attractive. He had a gift for understanding how to talk to people from other cultures and make them feel like his friend. I felt like I was a really close friend of OJ Simpson's from the first night I met him at Superstars in 1974, where he and Billie Jean King and I were all doing the interviewing for Superstars segments. And I met him that day, and I was dazzled beyond dazzled. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at my life now. I'm meeting OJ Simpson and Billie Jean King, et cetera, et cetera. And went out to a big group dinner with the producers that night. And at the dinner, OJ said, hey, I saw a bar down the street. You want to go with me afterward? And I never forget, I went to bed that night thinking, oh my God, I'm friends with OJ Simpson. What bigger change could ever have taken place in my life? And then we went to the Montreal Olympics together and partied together there. And later I succeeded Howard Cosell as the halftime highlights guy on Monday Night Football, started traveling on the Monday Night Football circuit. The other guys, Meredith and Gifford, they were older. So OJ and I became a dance team on that. So I had a lot of background with OJ, played golf with him, friendly with him, moved to Los Angeles, lived in Los Angeles, spent time with OJ and Nicole, and then had to deal with the shock of that event and that circumstance, and took me a period of time, a period of adjustment, to be able to accept and acknowledge there's no other way this could happen. He killed her.
Right.
And he did. And he killed Ron Goldman too.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show you, be careful about your temper, particularly if you're a public figure. Don't go
Yeah.
over the line.
Yeah.
Don't do the one thing that takes 30 seconds that's going to ruin your reputation forever. Juicy did. Do
Yeah.
I still love him somewhere in my heart? Yes, I
Yeah.
still love him somewhere in my heart.
Yeah.
Is that a misguided emotion? Yeah, I think it is. I should be able to offload that, but it's real. I had to rewrite the book. I had
Mm.
to actually rewrite the book to be more thoughtfully objective and more presentable about that one part, because the first thing I wrote was too loving and laudatory for
Mm.
somebody double murderer.
Mm-hmm. I thought you handled it just right. Did you see the
Thank you.
Netflix series American Manhunt about OJ? This is in
I've
the
not seen the Netflix series.
okay, in part 4 of the episode. You can cue that up, or you can just look for this clip of Mike Gilbert, his agent. I think you knew Mike, right? Did you know his
Yeah.
agent? Yeah. So they're interviewing him, and he's reflecting on when he was over at Rockingham with OJ when they were packing up the house because he had to sell it. And here's Mike Gilbert. It was just one of those moments that was right. And I said, OJ, what happened that night? Just what happened? And he said, what do you think happened? And I thought to myself, do I do what agents do and say, oh, yeah, I know you didn't do it. You would never have done it. Or do you tell the truth? So I said, OJ, I always thought you did it. And he glanced up and I said, not because I see you as a murderer, because I don't. And he just kind of shook his head and he said, if Nicole wouldn't have opened the door with a knife, she would still be alive. I didn't sleep very well that night, but I just remember lying there thinking, is that a stunning statement?
I think there's no doubt that he did it. I knew him well enough to know that he was not without a conscience or heart. I had spent enough time around him and Nicole to understand the very turbulent forces that took place between them. I think I know a little bit more about the story than some other people do, but it's the kind of thing that you know without knowing. I don't have proof. I don't
Mm.
have some concrete evidence that would support what I say. I think there was a factor involved that people understandably overlook. But at the end of the day, a very dear friend of mine became a double murderer. And, you know,
Well,
another very dear friend of mine who was a great man, and I won't besmirch his reputation by quoting him, but he said to me one day at a sports event, if you've ever been married, you know the feeling.
mm,
And I've been married 4 times, and I couldn't honestly tell you that I don't at least understand what that person was saying when he said, if you've ever been married, you know the feeling. It's a unique relationship.
mhm.
Turbulence takes place within it. It's face to face. It's deeply ingrained. I'm not saying I forgive OJ or that I let him off the hook for this. I don't. You can't go and murder people.
Yeah.
But I think there were lots of circumstances involved that are still to this day unseen and unknown.
Interesting. You don't want to elaborate on that?
No, I
Okay.
can't elaborate on that because
I
I
see.
do
You
not,
don't know for sure. Yeah.
quote, know,
Well,
unquote.
the best book on this.
I only know what I know about OJ, which was
Okay.
he was a kind, loving, benevolent friend. I wrote it in the book. If if you were looking for the one friend in Hollywood in that scene at that time who would remember your birthday, who would
Hmm.
send you a Miss Grace's lemon cake at Christmas every year, etc., that was OJ. He was a thoughtful person.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, there are mass murderers or serial killers, but a one-off event like
They
that
all have others.
probably has a different explanation. The best book on this is David Buss's "When Men Behave Badly." He's an evolutionary psychologist at UT Austin, and he talks about, first of all, sex differences and jealousy. So men and women are equally jealous when their spouses cheat, or they imagine they will. But men are much more mate guarding, physically stalking, aggressive that way. Women do other things, express their jealousy. We know OJ was stalking her. We have all those 911 calls. He's back here again. He's here again. He's yelling at me. You could hear him screaming in the background. So my interpretation of his agent's quote there is that he went over there like he has before to stalk her, to see what's going on. Or maybe he sees Ron Goldman, who's this good-looking guy. Oh my God, are they having sex or whatever? And we know from David Buss's other research on that he did a famous experiment in which he asked college students, these are undergraduates at UT Austin, have you ever thought about killing somebody who you felt wronged you? And it was like 85% of men and 70% of women said, oh yeah, absolutely. And then he asked them to write down what are some of the scenarios, and they were just brutal. Now, most people don't carry it out, but the impulse is in there for everybody. If you feel an injustice, you want to strike out and get revenge. In the case of men, mate guarding their significant others. I mean, intimate partner abuse is the number one killer of women. When women die violently, it's not car crashes or whatever. It's intimate partner homicide.
Well, what I can say from my personal experience is just this. If you ever wanted to find in your background of social relationships a relationship which was intense enough, driven enough, emotional enough that it could in some way go over the line, that was Juicy and Nicole.
Yeah.
Their feelings for, about, and against each other
Mm.
were over the line. They
Yeah.
were both wildly, turbulently emotional.
Yeah.
And I think that that is definitely part of the picture.
The other documentary series I recommend is the ESPN series OJ in America. I don't know if you saw that, also multi-part. I wrote about this in my conspiracy book because OJ was acquitted by a conspiracy theory that the LAPD planted the bloody glove and planted the blood evidence and so on to a jury that's mostly black in LA. And the ESPN series documents this in the 1950s, the migration from the South of African Americans to Southern California. and you look at the relationship with the LAPD in the 1950s and 60s, it was pretty bad. I mean, they did plant evidence. They did nab people that were probably innocent just because, well, maybe we didn't get him for this one, but he did something else, so we're going to get him. Right, that kind of thing. So when Johnny Cochran says, they planted the bloody glove or whatever to a mostly black jury, it's like, I don't know if this one's true, but that's the kind of thing they would do. So, yeah.
100%. It might have sounded completely far-fetched to me, okay? I thought that's BS, planting the bloody glove, etc. But you are correct about the history of the LAPD. You are correct about the suspicions that people in the black community had toward the LAPD. And if you read my book, you also know the very plausible explanation that my wonderful friend, close friend, Jack Nicholson provided
Yes.
after the verdict arrived, when he said, Lamp, that many black jurors, almost all of them women, they'd been sequestered for 13 months. They wanted to go to lunch. And,
Right.
and that rang true to me too. They wanted to go to lunch. They had been sequestered for 13 months. And what an ordeal.
Yeah.
What a brutal ordeal. And how were they ever going to be able to parse the competing facts to really be sure what the truth was? Okay, let's get out of here. Guilty. Boom.
Right.
Could have happened. Could have
Yeah.
happened. Don't know that it happened, but it could have
Yeah.
happened. And, Jack is a genius at figuring stuff like that out.
I love that section on there. How did you meet Jack Nicholson, and what's he like?
We had the same accountant. We had the
I
same
see.
accountant, and because of that, we started playing golf with each other. And it was a phenomenal experience because he was an extremely experienced and wise man, and I learned more about life in golf carts with Jack Nicholson than I did from most of my other male mentors in life. He's important.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And the coverage of Race Across America and the triathlon and the other endurance sports, that was the up and coming thing at the time. I don't know how much of the background you knew about originally called the Great American Bike Race, but that was, John Marino had already ridden across America and wanted to do it as a race. And Jerry Kushnick was his agent. Jerry Kushnick was the agent of Jay Leno. I sent you that article. I don't know if you had time to read it, but I'll recap it here for the audience. And so it was Jerry Kushnick who landed us ABC Wide World of Sports to cover the very first race. With Bob Iger I don't think he was like 27 years old or something. It was his first job.
Program administrator, Bob Iger.
That's amazing.
Exactly right. Yes.
What he's become. Anyway, so after we did the race and, you guys covered it and you won an Emmy Award, it was a big deal and a lot of people wanted us to do it again. And ABC came to us, I think it was Iger, who said, this Kushnick guy drove us crazy. I mean, he wanted us to fix the race. Like, fellas, keep it together until Ohio, and then you can go race from there because, we want it to be close. It's like, we're not doing that. This is not what this is about, right? So, and I guess he was telling you guys, how to film the race and so on. Anyway,
he was very controlling. Yes.
He was. Okay. I never saw any of that.
I was aware of it. I didn't have to deal with it. I was sitting in a cross-country vehicle, looking out the window, watching you guys.
Right.
And day after day after day, hour after hour after hour. And the biggest question is what music is on the jukebox. But I knew we were going to make it. I knew that. Somehow or another, you guys were going to get to the East Coast, and you did. All four of you.
Yeah, that was astonishing. But anyway, he told us we want to film your race again, but we don't want to deal with Kushnick. So we were young and naive, so we went to Kushnick and said, they don't like you. What are we going to do? And he goes, well, I own your race. I copyrighted the name Great American Bike Race. So we went back to Iger, and he said, fellas, just change the name. We don't care what you call it. And that's how it
became the Race Across America.
Right.
And you offloaded Jerry Kushnick?
We did, yes. And
Smart
then,
move.
I sent you the coda on that he ended up getting colon cancer and died after one of his twins got AIDS, the first child to get AIDS from a blood transfusion. And then his wife, Helen Kushnick, took over the business, and she was the agent that negotiated Leno to get the letter to get Johnny's spot in the Tonight Show, and then she became a controlling freak, and they ended up firing her and blocked her from going on the lot. And there's a great made-for-TV movie, The Late Night Wars, it's called, where who's the famous Kathy Bates plays Helen Kushnick.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow, I got to go see that.
Oh,
That's
you should see it.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's online. You can find it online. The Late Wars, it's called. Late
Late
Night Wars. Late Night Wars, it's called. Yeah,
Kathy Bates is Helen Kushnick.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's incredible. And then she got
Well,
breast
I mean,
cancer and
look,
died. I mean, it's a tragic
the
story.
story you just told about Kushnick and, his child who got AIDS and all the things that happened to him. What was his karma? How do you
I know. I
gather
know.
that kind of karma? What
I
did
know.
you do in a
That's
past life
right.
to become Jerry Kushnick? Wow.
All right, Jim, I know you got other interviews to get to and you have a real life unlike me. So let's just wrap it up here and talk about what
No,
you
no,
what
no. I don't have a real life, Michael. I am promoting a book. Okay, that
oh
is
yeah.
the only life I have right now is promoting a book.
By
I'm
the
not.
way, did you end up commentating the Pacquiao fight that was recent? I think
No, I
you
didn't do
mentioned
the
on
Pacquiao
Rogan.
fight. No, I am doing some fights now. Back calling some fights near the top of the sport, but the Pacquiao fight is the kind of exhibition I like to stay away from, okay? I'm
Yeah,
not interested in Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. I'm not interested in Manny
yeah,
Pacquiao coming back at age 46. I'm interested in Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford, two fighters who are at their functional peaks and among the top 3 or 4 fighters in the sport, ready to fight each other, a real event. That's the kind of stuff that I try to focus my attention on.
that's in
I
September.
I I was with Manny at his induction into the Boxing Hall of Fame,
Oh wow,
a few weeks before that, and he's an amazing person. He's a wonderful person. He's extraordinary in every way, and I had a fantastic time with him at the Boxing Hall of Fame. But I knew that I did not need to see his fight with
I
Barrios.
see. I didn't see any of that. I did watch the Tyson Jake Paul thing, and I was really disappointed because watching all the videos he was posting on Twitter of him working out, I thought, oh my God, this guy is so inspirational. He's going to kick his ass. And then nothing happened. It was like, okay, so this wasn't a real fight. Yes, come on.
When you're 58, you're 58.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. I mean, there's only
That's
so much you could do.
that's just an indelible, functional, physical
Yes,
reality.
yes.
58 is not 28.
Uh,
So at the
oh,
end of the day, and if Jake Paul wants to prove something, fight a real fighter.
yeah,
Don't
yeah.
fight somebody who's been functionally retired for 20 plus years.
Although I wouldn't mind being 58 again. But that's looking back from 70.
Totally hear you. I totally hear you. Sitting here 76 years old.
All right. What would you recommend to an inspiring sports journalist or news journalist? Because you were a news journalist here in LA for a few years. What would you recommend they do today to have a career?
Stay away from social media.
Mm,
Focus on the truth. Focus on legitimacy, objectivity, um, all of the fundamentals on which this business was built. And I don't think many of them will listen to me. And I think that I am selling an outmoded and old world view of the media process. But that's just me. That's how I came up. That's what I was conditioned by and for. And practically nothing in this world offends me as much as somebody paying attention to social media and thinking that they're reading something meaningful in somebody else's post. It's
mm-hmm.
it's it's nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been because I'm a little bit older
Nobody's going to
too,
listen to that.
and
So thank you for giving me the chance to offer advice to people who don't want to know.
yeah, but I mean the economic incentives are just there for them to do that, right? You
Oh
just
yes. Oh yeah. And are economic incentives poison? Sure.
yeah,
In almost every way, economic incentives are poison. Did I chase them? Oh yeah. But I was fortunately in a business at a time when economic incentives were built in. That was just part of the game, and I was going to get them if I managed to survive, hold on, and continue to do something that would be called success.
yeah.
And with the help of thoughtful people who created great events like uh, the Race Across America and the Ironman Triathlon,
Mm-hmm.
I achieved all that.
Yeah. Is there anything looking back you would have done differently, or I really screwed that up, or I shouldn't have done this?
There are a lot of things I would have done differently. Yeah. my personal life was a mess
Mm,
for a lot of the time during my broadcasting career. I
mm.
was protected in some ways from negative fallout from that. Um, yeah, there are many things I probably would have done differently, but you don't get two chances at life. You only get
Right.
one. You know,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
all
I mean,
those.
I remember um, y- y- you learn early on in a life like mine to recognize what reality is, and that you're not going to change it. I was on a trip to California with my mother when I was 5 or 6 years old, and we were staying at a friend's house, a former Air Force buddy of hers, and she got introduced to another woman, and the other woman said, "Oh, you." She heard my mother's story, and she said, "You dear woman, I feel so bad for you. You have these two beautiful boys, and you've lost both of your husbands."
Mm,
And my mother looked at her with a frank expression and said, "Madam, I didn't lose my husbands. Gloves, keys, a handbag every once in a while. I lose those things.
mm,
My husbands died."
mm,
And from that, never forgot it. I understood life is facts. It's not what you want it to be. It's
mhm.
what it is. So you adjust to what is in front of you. My mother did it for another 30 plus years. I'm still trying to do it too.
Nice.
76 years old, still lucky.
Perfect way to.
Lucky to know you and lucky to have seen what you did.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes. Well, here it is. It happened. Get it. It's a good book. It's a great, it belongs up there with all the other interesting memoirs. Like Matthew McConaughey's book has been a bestseller. Yours should be too.
Good friend a long time ago, a very, very thoughtful person,
Mm,
and not surprised that he wrote a really good book.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you don't win an Academy Award for a movie like Dallas Buyers Club unless you're smart enough to choose to do that
Right.
part.
Right.
And he was smart enough.
Nice. All right, Jim. That sounds good.